All right, so hi guys. I'm sitting here at home. It's about 8 o'clock on November 3rd, and like a lot of you, I'm probably watching the election results. And it occurred to me that, especially for a lot of our IB students, you guys don't have the opportunity to take government because you take history of the Americas, and so there is a large chunk about our kind of electoral system that is probably mystery and magic, and you're not ever going to get any real direct instruction on it in school. We typically save that for seniors, their senior year of high school, whenever it really matters, because they're able to vote. But if you don't get to take the government class, then you don't get to, then you don't ever get that instruction. And I would be remiss if I let you graduate high school without covering at least some of the basics. So tonight, I'm going to go through a quick rundown with you of how the government in America kind of operates and how we get there. Specifically, the presidency, but also the other sections as well. So let's go here. So how elections in the government work in America. So there's a couple of key points before we even get started. First, America's not a democracy. In a democracy, the people vote on everything. Any new laws, any new rules, regulations, trade wars, whatever, goes directly to the vote of the people. There are some problems with that, which is that the average person is busy being mothers or fathers or teachers or bankers or businessmen, and they don't necessarily have time to follow every element of global politics to make the best and most informed decisions. So, what we have is what's called a representative republic, and that is where we democratically elect people to go do that decision making for us. We elect people who are supposed to represent us and our interests and our beliefs and vote on our behalf on the things that maybe we don't have time to be experts of. Um, our government really operates in three components. You've got the Congress, and there are two parts to the Congress, and this is where people usually start to get confused. There are two parts to the Congress, all right? There's the House of Representatives, which has got 400 plus members, and then there's the Senate, which has got just over 100, all right? And then there's obviously the President, and then there's the Supreme Court. Congress, the House, well, we'll talk about that in a second. State governments typically look a lot like the federal government. For instance, in Tennessee, there's a Tennessee Senate, there's a Tennessee House, there's a Tennessee Supreme Court, but instead of a president, we have a governor. But follows the same kind of role for the state of Tennessee that the president does for the nation. They're the ones that sign the laws. They have veto power. Veto means that they can say, I don't like a law, so I refuse to sign it. And then it goes back to the Congress. And then the Congress has to approve it with such an overwhelming vote that the president cannot veto it. And so, yeah, so state governments usually look a lot like the federal elections. So, how do we get something like the president? So, it starts with constitutional eligibility. In order to be eligible to be president, according to the Constitution, you have to be at least 35, and you have to be a citizen of the United States by birth. And that means that you either had to be born in America or born overseas but to U.S. citizen parents. All right? And you have to have been a resident of the United States for at least 14 years. So you have to be a citizen and you have to have been living here for like 14 years. This is why, for instance, Arnold Schwarzenegger couldn't run to be president, even though he was the governor of California, because he wasn't born in the United States. All right? Then we have what's called the primary and the caucus system. And maybe you guys followed some of this year. This is where each party is electing the person that is going to run for them. In America, we have a two-party system. Other countries have many more parties. In England, for instance, there's like 6 parties that all have a decent share of the governmental power, even though the Labour and the Tories really are their two big parties. In America, we basically have a two-party system. You've got the Republicans, who are conservatives, and then you've got the Democrats, who are typically progressives. There are a spectrum inside of each of those parties, going from left to right. Right usually meaning conservative, left meaning liberal or progressive. But the primaries are how the parties decide who is going to run for them. For instance, the Republicans this year didn't have a primary season because they had an incumbent president, meaning a president who was already sitting in office. So we only had primaries for Democrats this year. This year, there were about 15 real potential nominees for the Democratic Party, and so they go through a series of primaries, and this is where each state has an election, and they vote on who they think the representative for that party should be. And then what happens is whoever wins the most of those states, all right, uh, becomes the party's candidate at the national convention. So each of those primary elections happen on a different day. But none of those votes really matter until National Convention date, where the representatives for those states show up to cast their votes for the representative for their state at the National Convention. Each party has a national convention, even if there is an incumbent president, and that is when the presidential nominee is conferred. And so after the national convention, you have your two candidates: your candidate for the Democratic Party and your candidate for the Republican Party. After that, there are usually 3 presidential debates televised. This year, one of the debates took place in Nashville at Belmont University. We only had 2 this year because the second one was canceled because of concerns over COVID and concerns over the rules. But normally there are 3. Um, Sometime between the sorry, I forgot, vice president. Vice president is usually picked around the national convention. Then we head into the general election, and this is where everyone goes and votes. But what's interesting is that when you vote, you're not actually voting directly for the president. You're voting for the president, but your vote gets counted by county, and then your vote goes to an electoral college representative. And basically, there are 538 electors, which is the total number of House of Representative seats and senators. And they vote for the president based on what the people in their district elected them to vote for. The Electoral College was a way to make sure that certain states were not ignored in the presidential race, and also as a failsafe to make sure that somebody crazy wasn't elected. And we'll talk about that in just a minute whenever we talk a bit more about population. And then finally, there's Inauguration Day on January 20th. The time period between the election, which is always on November 3rd, and the inauguration, which is always on January 20th, is sometimes referred to as the lame duck session, meaning that if there's a president in an office, but they either don't get reelected or it's their second term and they are not going to be the next president, that time period between November and January 20th is a time where not a lot happens except for some presidential pardons and some vanity bills, because there's not a lot of reason to support that particular president. And so they call it the lame duck session. So the roadmap to the presidency kind of looks like this, right? So you meet your initial qualifications here, and then you go through the primary caucuses, right? And you run against the other people who want to be that party's representative. And then the people vote in their caucus or in their primary. A caucus is a little bit different than a primary vote, because a primary vote is like a normal election voting. You go and you cast a vote to a ballot. But a caucus is done in person, and it involves discussion and standing in corners of a room, and the whole thing is very weird. And if you're really interested in it, I highly go watch a YouTube video on like the Iowa caucuses. The way that they happen are really, really crazy. But there's a more involved conversation, and people's vote can change throughout the course of the night. And then that all leads to the national conventions, and then the actual presidential campaigns go through. Right, and there's lots of campaigning and advertising and commercials, and then there's the general election where we all cast our vote, and then those votes go to the electors. And then on the night of the election, like tonight, we are all watching the race to see if somebody gets to 270 electoral votes. And that leads us to talk about the Electoral College. Here's the Electoral College. All right, this is the number value of each state. So if I am a presidential candidate and I win Nebraska, I get 5 votes. But if I win California, I get 55. And you're like, man, that's a lot more votes than like Nebraska. And you're absolutely right, it is. But the reason why is that these numbers are actually based on population. Here's a population density map of America. And you can see the vast majority of the American population lives over here, right? Especially up here in New England. Look at how dense the population is up there. Florida's also pretty jam-packed with some hot spots along the way, like Atlanta. You'll notice Nashville is dark red. We got a couple of the surrounding counties that are a little bit darker, and then the rest of the state is white, right? And so this is what the population density of America looks like. And you'll notice that a lot of these states are almost empty. Very, very, very low population density. And that's why, going back to this map, they're not worth many electoral votes. Because just not a lot of people live there. Most of the people live around here, which is why most of the electoral college votes are around here. The reason why we have the electoral college is in theory, because if you look at this map, and if I were a presidential candidate, right, I would never have any reason to care about most of these places, right? I would do all of my campaigning in California, New York, Florida, and Texas, because that's where the vast majority of the population in America lives. They live in those places, and really I wouldn't even have a reason to care about many of these places in the middle here, because while they have more people, it's nothing compared to the population of Florida and Texas. In fact, here's a map of America if the state's size represented their population. And so you can see already how this could be a bit problematic, right? It really means that, presidential candidates would only care about these really big states, and then everyone else would kind of be forgotten about. And what that means in turn is that once they become president, they really only have to worry about trying to keep these few states happy. They don't have to worry about keeping these smaller states happy, much less these really small states happy, because who cares? Nobody lives there. And because it's a popular vote, it doesn't matter. So we use the electoral college system so that way every state kind of matters, at least a little bit, and it gives importance to states that should matter, but maybe wouldn't if all we cared about was raw population. The problem, though, is that what it does is it shifts the importance of certain key states. So, for instance, Florida always plays a huge role in our elections. Well, why? Because Florida is a what's called purple state. There are about equal parts Democrat as there are Republicans. Oh wait, hold on. And there's a lot of electoral votes there. There are 29 electoral votes there, right? That's a lot more. Tennessee almost always votes Republican, right? But there's only 11 votes here. So Florida ends up being a hugely influential and important vote for the president as a whole. And let me show you what that looks like. So 538 does a great job of laying out the roadmap here. So this is kind of what the roadmap looks like. So they're basing it based on probable states that they win and their electoral values. And you'll notice the Florida bar is huge here, right? And you'll notice that a lot of these states that kind of make or break the election are very close, right? 57 or 47-52, 48-50, 48-50, 48-50, 49-50. So these states are all very, very close. And these end up being the states that become the most important. Even though California, right, and New York have some of the largest populations in America, it doesn't matter as much because they are not ever going to swing the election because they're always going to go Democratic, just like Oklahoma and Arkansas and Alabama are always going to go Republican. Now, from a presidential system, we have that pretty sorted. And this is fine too because House of Representative seats are based on population. The House changes number of representatives per state every 10 years based on the census data. Where this gets crazy though is when you talk about the Senate. Every state gets 2 senators no matter what. So what that means is California, with its huge population, and Texas, with its huge population, they each only get 2 senators. But Montana and Wyoming, where almost nobody lives, they get 2 senators as well. And so this is where the Senate becomes the real battleground, because the Senate is not always representative of the people, because it is not based on population, and it's not based on population density, and it's not even like the Electoral College, a weighted system. It is simply a raw number where every state gets to, regardless of whether you're like, I think this is Wyoming here, that's got nobody that lives in it, or whether you are New York. You get 2 representatives each. So, that, though, is the basic rundown of how the election system in America works and how we get there. I'll upload this PowerPoint so that way if you want to take a look at the infographics a little bit more, you can. And if you want to get into the specifics of it a bit more, you can. I will tell you that we probably will not know the actual results of this election for at least another couple of days, because there are so many mail-in ballots and there are so many absentee ballots. So regardless of what you wanted to happen, it's going to remain relatively uncertain. And I would encourage you that some of you are already old enough to vote, and I hope that you did, and some of you are going to be old enough to vote within the next year or so. Please make sure to engage in your civic duty to vote. Youth voter turnout is incredibly low, and that's bad for America, because you guys are the future of our country. It has never made sense to me that we give that so much of the say of what is going to happen in the next while in our country is determined by old people who might not even be alive to see it. Young people need to go out and vote more. Make your voices heard. Sway how people think about things, so that way you can shape the country the way that you think that it should be, because it's going to be yours to live in. All right? So yeah, that's that. There will be a discussion post about the election down below. Feel free to do that, but I didn't, the day after the election, I didn't want to come in swinging real hot back into content, and I realized that we just didn't really have time that where we were covering this as part of the IB program. So it seemed like the perfect time to take a day and kind of sit back and really just kind of let you think about the process and maybe dig into it a little bit deeper in ways that maybe hadn't been explained to you yet. So that's all I got for today. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll come back with some content for you Thursday, Friday. All right? Bye.